In 2009, Charles Carneglia would be sent away for life for numerous crimes, including 4 murders. The 1977 murder of Michael Cotillo outside the Blue Fountain Diner. The 1983 murder of Sal Puma. The 1990 World Trade Center shooting death of Louis DeBono. And the 1990 shooting death of an armored truck driver by the name of Jose Delgado Rivera at JFK International Airport. Hello and welcome back to another episode of New York City Crime Spot. Now there would be another homicide that they would never be able to fully connect to Charles Carneglia, but by all accounts he had at least something to do with it, if not the assailant who took the life of Albert Gelb on March 11th, 1976. Now this is a story that I have spoken about before in my upload about John and Charles Carneglia, which is the thumbnail you're seeing right here. However, I did not go to the location where these events happened in that upload, so I figured, why not? You guys who don't live in New York can get a little view of Ozone Park, and you can get a view of where these criminal events took place. And Charles had a long criminal career. Him and his brother John, of course, in tandem with each other, were both born in the 1940s. By the late 1960s, they were being arrested for numerous crimes. In 1968, they'd be arrested for running a multi-million-dollar stolen car operation. The following year, they would be arrested for truck hijacking. And this was their bread and butter. Stolen cars, hijacking at a JFK. And this is what these guys were doing. Of course, it didn't hurt that their family owned a junkyard at 651 Fountain Avenue. Junkyard that I visited in my upload about these two brothers. Junkyard where, according to future court witnesses, Kevin McMahon, who was somewhat of an adopted son of John Carneglia, and mob associate Peter Bud Zaccaro, would say that on this junkyard, Charles Carneglia had a place which he called the barn, which he would keep mementos of those that he murdered. And in this barn, according to Kevin McMahon, Charles Carneglia would dissolve the body of John Favara. He would dissolve his body in a 55-gallon drum of acid, according to Kevin McMahon. Of course, John Favara being the gentleman who was a neighbor of John Gotti's, and hit with his car and killed John Gotti's son Frank Gotti while he was riding a little motorized scooter, a little motorized bike, coincidentally given to him by one Kevin McMahon. According to Kevin McMahon, there was problems with dissolving the body. It was taking too long. Ultimately, the job would get done, and Charles Carneglia would show up to the Lindenwood Diner and throw a piece of John Favara's finger bone into Angelo Ruggiero's soup. This, of course, according to Kevin McMahon. On February 10th of 1975, Charles Carneglia is leaving Tommy DeSimone's wedding. It's way after midnight, and he's going to make his way to the Esquire Diner, located at 10545 Cross Bay Boulevard. It's where we're walking to right now. Inside that diner, he's going to run into mob associate Peter Bud Zaccaro, who at that time was a car thief, a guy who was feeding cars to the Carneglia brothers' chop shop junkyard. An all-around criminal, only about 19 or 20 at that time, though. He would be with his friend Malcolm Settle and his friend Andrew Curo. Now, later on, Andrew Curo, he would be arrested in the 80s for his involvement in heists. And while he was arrested, he would also be found, while he was doing time, he would actually also be found guilty of the murder and dismemberment of his girlfriend, one April Ernst, for which he would get a life sentence for. So all around great guys hanging out in this diner. And ultimately, after going to Tommy DeSimone's wedding, Charles makes his way to the Esquire Diner. Inside there is also a 24-year-old man, local guy, by the name of Albert Gelb. He's a court officer working downtown in Brooklyn. Came back home to his area. He often borrowed one of his best childhood friend's cars, a woman by the name of Lynn Barinello, who was married but was a close friend of Albert's. He would make his way back and to the neighborhood, and he would catch up with Lynn, and she would say, "Hey, let's go get something to eat." And I said, "Okay, cool. Let's go over to the Esquire." It's about 3 in the morning at this time, but Albert, being hungry, he wanted to get something to eat, so his friend came with him to the diner. Inside that diner was the gentleman that I mentioned. Now, Charles Carneglia at one point leans up against the table where Bud Zaccaro and his friends are sitting at, and Albert Gelb notices that he's got a couple of guns in his jacket. So Albert Gelb just, could have ignored it, but he didn't, unfortunately. So he follows Charles Carneglia downstairs to the downstairs bathrooms of the Esquire Diner, and he says, "Hey, buddy, you got a tin?" Tin meaning permit for the guns, or if he's like a law enforcement kind of guy. And Charles Carneglia basically goes, brushes him off. "Yeah, whatever, buddy." Ultimately, they get into an argument, and it gets physical. You could hear the screaming coming down from the basement upstairs at the diner. Peter Bud Zaccaro makes his way down there. He gets involved in the argument also. Ultimately, they run upstairs. They take Charles' guns, as well as Albert's guns, and they hide them in the car. The cops come. They end up arresting Charles for the altercations and the gun possession. And while being arrested, Charles goes to Albert, "I'll get you. I'll get you." Something that Albert Gelb took seriously, and something that he thought about. Something that he would tell his friend Lynn Barinello about. Something that he would remain paranoid about. Is this guy actually going to get me? And it would only get worse as he was getting prank calls at his house. He was getting harassed. But he would just brush it off, say, "Hey, what are you going to do?" Now we're on Cross Bay Boulevard. Alright, so now guys, we are inside the Esquire Diner. I'll be narrating over this due to the music playing inside. So this is the diner inside where the incident happened between Charles Carneglia and Albert Gelb, right here at the Esquire Diner on Cross Bay Boulevard. Here is some of the interior that you're looking at now. And of course, as I've been doing lately, we order a little bit of food. We have a coffee. We have some Eggs Benedict with some home fries. Overall, not terrible. However, as you could see right now, overdone on the eggs. Eggs Benedict should be runny. Sorry, guys. Gotta say, not that great. But here's another view of inside the diner. Unfortunately, the downstairs at the time of the Carneglia Gelb incident, there was bathrooms down there where the incident took place. Bathrooms are no longer down there. Here's another shot from the inside. Another shot. And here you have a business card for the diner. All right. So we just left the Esquire. And we're going to head back to where we were before. We're going to talk a little bit before we get to our next location. So in 76, as Charles's trial is looming for this, and after he's been harassing Gelb for months on end, and Gelb is not back down, he's all ready to go to court, talk about it. Interestingly enough, about a month before he's supposed to go to trial, Charles is arrested again. He's arrested with his brother John and some others. And this is in connection to mail truck heists dating back to the early 1970s. They finally were able to pin this on them and a few others. And one of the guys that they're arrested with is actually a guy by the name of Robert Frenchie McMahon. A name you might be familiar with. A guy who was involved in the Lufthansa heist. And a guy who was later murdered in his car, sitting alongside Joe Manry. So, these guys, they run in the same circles, truck hijackers, airport robbers, mail truck robbers, a lot of the same overlap as far as these guys who are coming out of this areas of Ozone Park and Howard Beach and East New York. A lot of these guys were in the same circles and they would do the same shit together, whether they were associates, whether they were made, whether they were Irish, Italian, Jewish, whatever it may be, So, with Charles's trial looming, he's getting in trouble again, like I mentioned, for the mail truck robberies. And he's concerned. He's concerned that he's going to get hit with the charges in relation to the Gelb incident, and now these new charges, and, it's all piling up. However, on the night of March 11th, 1976, as Albert Gelb is returning home late one night after midnight, he would be stopped about 3 blocks away from his home, cut off by what witnesses refer to as a white car, and gunned down, shot multiple times, sitting in his automobile. We're going to go to where that happened, and we're going to talk a little bit more. All right, everybody, we are now in the Richmond Hill section of Queens, New York City, the neighborhood which is right next to Ozone Park, called Richmond Hill. And much like the night where Albert Gelb ran into Charles Carneglia at the Esquire Diner, it's late, it's after midnight, he's coming home from work, from his job as a court officer in downtown Brooklyn. But this time he's being followed home by his friend by the name of David Varshin. David Varshin. And he's following Albert Gelb home because they're going to be doing some Bible study. Now, Albert Gelb was Jewish, but he had recently became interested in the Jehovah's Witness faith, as did his friend David, and they were going to go do some studying. It's late, but I'm sure these guys are wired. They're working late. You can't just run home and go to sleep sometimes. So it's after midnight, about 1:30, and David Varshin is following Albert Gelb. At this time, Gelb is 25. At the initial incident with Charles Carneglia at the diner, he was 24. And once again, as I mentioned, that court case is looming. Charles is waiting to find out, is he going to prison because of all this shit that's going on with him, and these mail truck heists and all these gun charges and resisting arrest and the fighting with a court officer, just charge on top of charge. So Albert Gelb is making his way home, and his friend David Varshin is following him, and they're coming down here, down Atlantic Avenue.
Así ya te había puesto la llave.
And what's going to happen is they're going to come here to 109th Street. However, back behind me at the light where we were just at that corner, David Varshan, he's going to get stuck at that light, which is going to cause Albert Gelb to get a little ahead of him. Let's look at this little empty junkyard space here. Not sure what's going on in there. So Albert Gelb is going to get ahead of his friend, actually, and he's going to make a turn right here on 109th Street. And this is where it's going to get interesting. So Albert Gelb turns right here on 109th Street. And he's going to get cut off. He's going to get cut off by a white car who's going to pull up right in front of him. Now, he was just 3 blocks away from his home at that time. So a white car is going to pull up quickly next to him and cut him off. He's going to get cut off in front of the address of 9427 109th Street here in Richmond Hill. So right there, you're looking at 9427 109th Street. And on the night of March 11th, 1976, as Albert Gelb is coming down this block, he's going to be cut off by the white car. The assailant is going to jump out of the car right here where this van is. He's going to walk next to Albert Gelb's car, his driver's side. Albert Gelb probably thinking, what is going on? He's got his window rolled down as well. The assailant is going to fire into the driver's side. He's going to walk to the front of Albert Gelb's vehicle and fire multiple times through the windshield. Gelb will be hit in the face and the chest, ultimately losing his life. Right here, in front of 9427 109th Street. On March 11th, 1976. Now, as soon as this happens, the news articles come out. And of course, immediately in the article, they mention Charles's name, they mention John's name, they mention how the trouble that they're recently in, and they mention, of course, that Charles is a prime suspect due to what happened at the Esquire Diner. Unfortunately, they would never be able to connect Charles to this, or anybody. However, when Charles would finally be taken off the streets for good in 2009, this would be one of the homicides that he was charged with. Unfortunately, there would not be enough evidence to connect him to it. Although Peter Budsakara would say that Charles told him that Gelb had to go, because the guy just wouldn't stop. And although Charles was never charged with this murder, it's abundantly clear to law enforcement that he was behind it. As a matter of fact, if you look at the memorial page for Albert Gelb, the law enforcement page, which I'll post now, they basically say without saying, essentially, that Charles, the Gotti crew, guys in that ether, were responsible for this. In their hearts, they know it to be true. And it's something that I believe to be true as well. Of course, all the pieces fit. I hope you guys enjoyed this upload. I hope it was informative. I hope you enjoyed getting a glimpse of these neighborhoods in Queens. And hearing more of this history of these outlaws that used to run these streets. taking the lives of innocent people such as Albert Gelb, taking the lives of innocent people like Jose Delgado Rivera, and many more. Let us not look up to these guys, but research their stories and speak of them for what they are. Outlaws, outcasts, murderers, robbers, bad human beings who have hurt many. Let's use their stories as cautionary tales of how not to live your life. Thank you for watching New York City Crime Spot.